This is Burn This Book, a podcast where we, Nicole and Eden, read a banned or challenged book twice a month and discuss its meaning, impact, and censorship to make it more accessible for all readers. This week's book is Twilight by Stephanie Meyer, which was published in 2005. And today we have two guests. We've got Renae Deighton from Utah and Randi Deighton from Washington, D.C. Renae and Randi are twins, and they also both grew up in Washington, which is where Twilight takes place. And this is both their first time reading Twilight, which is surprising to us because they know a lot about vampires and pop culture and stuff like that. And, well, we're just so blessed that we have this opportunity to talk to them about their experience reading Twilight for the first time. Before we dive into the book, we'll have Nicole give us a quick summary.
Absolutely. So ridiculous. Okay, so Bella Swan from Arizona, but she's so pale. She ends up moving to Washington State to live with her dad because her mom is in a marriage and it's complicated, and she wants to give her mom space to make her own choices. Bella has many complexes. One is a savior complex that hopefully we'll get into. So she kind of is saving her mom from being a mother, and that's why she moves to Washington. It's wild. And so she moves to live with her dad, who's stayed there, and he's the chief of this tiny, tiny town. And while there, she encounters a very mysterious, beautiful, youthful family. And it turns out they're all vampires. And then she gets entangled into a very complicated relationship with one of them. And it just feels abusive and unnecessary.
Randi and Renae, before you dive into first impressions, let me tell you a little bit about my first time reading Twilight. It was 2005.
Whoa.
My family and I just got done. Well, every year, my sister and I, we compete. It's not really a competition. There aren't winners. We're just rated or tested on our piano skills. The Young Musician Festival, where there's a panel of judges and they just judge your piano piece. Anyway, this happens.
It's a thing.
It's a thing. Anyway, our tradition is after going to the Young Musicians Festival, rewarding us for working so hard and doing hard things. My parents take us to Boston Market, and then right next door is Borders Bookstore. R.I.P. And my first time reading Twilight was inside that Borders, which no longer exists. I took it off the shelf. I was like, this looks interesting. Started reading it, read the whole thing, did not buy it, put it back on the shelf. And then, I was hooked.
Wait,
anyway.
You read the whole thing in one sitting?
Yeah, we stay there till like dark. That's like our tradition. It was kind of a fun little thing.
I will say this is my first time reading Twilight, but it's not like I've never experienced Twilight. I think I watched the first movie once, but like it's around, right? So I like knew the major plot points and what people think about it and what it means to people, but I never read it. And I have so many thoughts, but more than that, so many emotions. I would love to like unpack with you all.
We're so excited. Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say, I feel like I didn't read it in 2005 because I was going through a real I'm not like other girls phases, and I'm like much more of a girl's girl now than I was in high school, and I feel like I didn't need to read it at either times in my life.
Yeah, Bella is very much who you probably were in high school, in that she's not a girl. She's not like other girls. So the irony there is pretty fun.
That is pretty funny.
Mm-hmm.
She's a Phoenix 5, but a Forks 10. Everyone wanted a piece of her in Washington, and nobody could pay attention to her in Phoenix.
I found this book so triggering. There were points while reading it because I was listening to it while I was doing other stuff, because if I was paying too much attention or just like only doing one thing while it was on, I got really upset. So I'd have to be like crafting and listening to it.
Yeah.
Or like walking and listening to it. Like I tried to listen to it while I was doing my dishes and I had to turn it off because I got so frustrated with everything, because not only is it poorly written, but it is, I think, very damaging to young women. Like the messages in it are so damaging. And then it's lazy writing. So it's not just like this is badly written. It's like lazy, and it relies so heavily on tropes, and like she gives you bits of information so that you like know other stuff. Like, oh, Bella can cook because her mom was basically a child she had to take care of. And you're supposed to connect that to Bella being responsible and grown up enough to make this big life choice of falling in love with a vampire. And I'm like, those two things are not connected. And like, Charlie's a good dad because he put chains on her tires. And you're supposed to be okay with that. But even though he is never around and allows her to get into these situations. And I will say Charlie's my favorite character.
Yeah.
Obviously.
100%.
But it was just lazy. It was very lazily written. And I found that frustrating. And then I found all the like 2000s purity culture. Yeah, I'm not like other girls. Lack of consent. Like I really want to get into consent in this book because that is what like really stuck out to me. Just like really triggering to my high school years.
Yeah.
I will also say, like, some on that 2000s purity culture, like, I grew up in the LDS church. I am still actively engaged in that religion. And I was a teenager in the LDS church when this book came out. And I remember people being like, the virginity of this whole thing is so Mormon. And, like, reading it, I was like, this was not how I grew up in Washington in the LDS church. Like, this, like, all of this is bad and was not the culture I remember. And I mean, that could be different from like different parts of where people grew up in the LDS church. But I was just like, this is gross. And this is not what I remember.
Edward is such a judgy virgin. And this is coming from someone who's got real judgy virgin vibes. But like, I hate him.
Yeah, I think it's interesting thinking about early 2000s versus now and all that you're talking about. Because I'm really curious what you're going to say about consent because that wasn't the big thing. The big thing was when I first read it, it was because my best friend had read it. And so I borrowed her books and I'd read them, but I like did it secretly because my mom hated them because they were like so like sexy but not, like everything about it was like just on the edge of something interesting but never getting there. And so my first time reading it was like very like titillating, but I remember like I remember thinking how boring Bella was as a person and how I was like, what? It just felt really unbelievable how obsessed everyone was with her because she had absolutely no personality. And then reading it this time, it was so boring at certain parts and so cringy that I had to put it down because I was like, I'm getting secondhand embarrassment from all of this. Like at one point, Bella describes the snow, which she hates, as like she was like, it just looks like the ends of Q-tips flying around. And I was like, what? That's Stephanie, that's how we're choosing to describe snow. And at another point, she's like getting onto the internet to do some Googling about vampires. And Stephanie goes into like detail about how she gets onto her favorite internet browser. And I was like, the choices of what she's including and not including are wild. And like her cooking fish was such a big part of Bella's life, was just constantly finding fish recipes for her dad. And I was just like, there were just so many things that, yeah, it felt really lazy, felt really unfinished, and every red flag about abusive relationships was in it, and that was very disturbing to me.
I really want to dive into this snow situation because they're in Northwest Washington. Snow there is like wet and thick, and it's not Utah snow, right?
Right.
And so, which everyone on this call has lived in Utah, so that's why I'm bringing that up. It's not soft, fluffy skiing snow. It's wet, it's dense, it's thick.
Yeah.
But it also, the way she describes it, it's like an inch of snow at the most, and probably not even that. And he puts chains on her car, which is absurd because you would never chain up the wheels of a truck for less than an inch of snow, specifically that kind of snow. It is bad for the truck. It's bad for the roads. That's nuts. Also, Charlie wouldn't own chains for that truck because he had just bought that truck. So unless he went and bought chains for that truck in the early fall in a place where it snows once or twice a year.
Yeah.
No, that's crazy.
Well, Stephanie Meyer was from Arizona 5. So she has no idea what she's talking about.
Arizona 5. Forks. I keep wanting to say Stamps, Arkansas because of Maya Angelou. Not the same. Forks, Washington, 10.
Yeah.
The other thing is, in Northwest Washington, when it snows, they shut down. At least our hometown did. So if there was enough ice on the road for that van to lose control and almost crush her, those kids wouldn't have gone to school.
Yeah. There's questions because even in Colorado, where like we are famous for our very big snowstorms, I've never put chains on a car ever.
Never put chains
and
on.
we've had like feet on feet of snow because I'm not driving in the mountains or like.
Hey, unless she was like, I'm going over Snoqualmie Pass to get to school today, you wouldn't put chains on those cars. Especially not a really heavy truck. It wouldn't need it. It would have the traction she needed to get to school.
Oh, I love that you're bringing that up. Okay, what other Eden? What's your retort? Because you're kind of the apologist in the group.
I am an apologist. Yes, I am. I will say on second read, loved it. I don't know if it's the nostalgia of just like that time of my life where just like imagine being in a bookstore from dinner time till like 10 p.m.
Yeah.
And then like having finished the book, we didn't have to buy it. Anyway, I've always been embarrassed that I liked Twilight because of aforementioned things. Movies were also also the movies were bad. So that was another reason to be embarrassed about liking Twilight. Oh, you don't have to feel sad because I am
like getting tender though. This is like an interesting this is getting good.
Yeah, I loved it for what it is as a quick fun read for teenagers. I think just like any other teen movie or book or anything like that, like you're not going to have really present adults.
Yeah.
The children are going to be making a lot of decisions. There is a little parentification going on of Bella, the fact that all of that is happening. But like that's stuff that like YA novels don't address as well. Like let's talk about Harry Potter and how like none of the adults there were present either. You like Bella being a bland character, I think is I'm not going to give too much credit to Stephanie Meyer, but
it is a trope in
it's a trope.
Adult.
Yeah.
Like the girls are always bland so that when a girl reads it, she can put her own personality into that.
There you go. Yes. Yeah. So there's that. But
as bland as she is just so mean.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I agree.
She like purposely like isolates herself and all that. But like being a high schooler, like very easy to put myself in her place and being like, okay, this 17, sure, you can make arguments that a 17-year-old is actually 117 years old. But like him being a 17-year-old never actually pursued any power or prestige that would actually like I watched a video essay, an hour long, titled, and I forgot the YouTube user, but she's like a pretty big video essayist. The title is An Ardent, Unironic Defense of Edward Cullen. So it'd be problematic if Carlisle was pursuing a relationship with Bella because he did use his time on Earth to pursue wealth and prestige in him being a doctor. Edward Cullen is still a freaking high schooler.
Okay.
Jump in.
Randi, go ahead.
Okay. I got a lot of issues with Edward. The first being, I want to talk about this consent thing. He has this power, right, to listen into people's thoughts. That is so invasive. But he can choose not to do it. And he chooses to listen into her friend's thoughts to find out more about her because he can't hear her thoughts. I feel like that is so invasive. Also, I have a lot of issues with him, like, watching her sleep.
Oh,
That is very creepy.
I don't like it. I don't like that he shows up in Port Angeles and is, like, creeping around. Like, I get he saves her, whatever. He's stalking her. Like, it's just, like, so...
And on some level, because he wants to cause her harm.
Yeah.
He's actively
100%.
that. But I think what really bothers me is that she is very clearly showing signs of someone that's having, like, a mental health crisis. She's making these big choices that are hurting herself. She, like, is isolating from her social group and from her mom. She is in a new place. She's all alone, and he knows that, and he takes advantage of it. And I also don't like, let me get out the list. I have a list. I wrote it down. I don't like that he refers to the people around her that are her age as children. That's really weird. Bothered me because I'm like, if the boy who asked her out on a date is a child and you can be like, ugh, that child, and, like, run him down for his age and immaturity, she's that same age. She's as immature. And then he has all these...
dating in college where boys would be like, she's so mature for her age. And then she would do things that were 19 years old. And that 25-year-old would be like, why is she doing this? And you'd be like, because she's 19.
Yeah.
Like because I like her, she's better is like classic.
You're like, ugh, Leonardo DiCaprio right there being like, I don't know why my 24-year-old girlfriend's doing this. I also really don't like that he'd have these big emotional outbursts and then blame her for it. And then she would always apologize.
Yeah.
So, like, he'd initiate intimacy. She would respond to an appropriate level of what he initiated. He would have a negative emotional response to that. And instead of saying, like, hey, you need to own your emotions, I'm going to own my emotions, she would apologize.
Yeah.
And that, like, really bothered me.
And he would never give her boundaries. He would do something, she would respond appropriately. He would never say, hey, when you do this, this is how it affects me. We should maybe not do that.
Yeah.
She was always responsible for her emotions and his. Yeah, the spying on her, listening to her friends to hear more about her really bothered me. What'd you say, Renae?
It's fine that she was in charge of everybody's emotions. She's everybody's mom.
Yeah.
I also really had issues with Carlisle and, like, his approach of consent because he turned all these people into vampires when they weren't able to emotionally give consent. I also really struggled with the suicide undertones. And I'm not saying, like, I know there's a view that, like, you can't have suicide in teen novels. And I'm not saying that because, like, mental health issues are a huge thing for teenagers. And, like, suicide is a thing in teenagers, and dealing with those thoughts and how to deal with your big emotions is, like, a very interesting thing to write about and to read about. But her suicidal tendencies are never addressed as anything other than just, like, devotion to him. The fact that Edward's fake mom tried to commit suicide, and it was so casual, like, oh, I tried to commit suicide, but then Carlisle saved me, whatever. And I'm like, okay, but she... Not that I'm saying, like, suicide is a good thing, but she made a choice and he took her death away from her. He took the death of all of these characters away from them. Like, Edward was sick. His family was gone. He wasn't in a place to be like, yes, I consent to a lifetime of being this other thing.
Yeah.
Like, I really had issues with that.
Is that not how it is in other vampire stuff?
It is, but these vampires seem moral. Like, the way it's written makes us take on the role that Carlisle was making a moral choice, a morally good choice. Yeah, a morally right choice.
So I know that we're...
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I know we're not talking about a Discovery Witches, but I can't, like, not connect these two things. Because the main character in that, Matthew, his vampire origin story is very similar. He jumps off the bell tower of a church because his wife and son had just died. And then he's...
Maybe he fell.
No, because by the third season, he does say that he did it. So
spoiler alert.
spoiler, he jumps off it. He is dying. He's in so much pain. The vampire comes to him and is like, I can end this pain. And he says, yes, do it. And they turn him into a vampire. But that is something they talk about as like, she admits like that was a bad choice on my part. Like he wasn't in a place to make that decision and I shouldn't have offered it to him. And he talks about like, I didn't really want this, but I was in so much pain. So like coming to somebody at their worst moment and being like, I can take away the pain you're feeling in this instant is like not a moral place to be. But in this book, it's presented as like Carlisle is this great savior who did this very moral thing, which I think across the board, Carlisle is viewed, the vampires in general are viewed as like these very moral, they don't eat humans, blah, blah, blah. Every decision they make is good and moral. But I'm like, a lot of the decisions they make are very morally compromised or just like bad. And that is like another major issue I had with the book across the board is that in literature, you have characters who are flawed. And the point of reading or watching a movie about a flawed character is that they learn to overcome that. And through watching or reading that, we learn how to overcome our flaws. And so usually what happens is a character has a flaw. They do something about that flaw. They become better. We learn to do that. A character has a flaw. A consequence comes from that. And then we learn a lesson from that consequence. What happens in this book is these characters are deeply flawed. Their flaws are presented as moral and just and good. And then nobody learns anything. Nobody develops at all. And it taught a generation of girls that if your boyfriend stalks you and treats you like shit, he loves you. Yeah. And like, I have so many issues with that. Yeah. Are we allowed to curse on this podcast?
Yeah, you're fine. I also think it was confusing that Carlisle worked in a hospital. Am I the only one that got confused by that? Like he was constantly around blood? Like, and being tempted for someone who's like...
It took him a long time to get there.
Say that again, Renae.
It took him a long time of like working to become a doctor in order to like build up the tolerance to be there. Which I think goes to Randy's point of them being like, look at Carlisle and how he is better.
Yeah.
Also, if Carlisle is supposed to be in his like late 30s, early 40s, why did he pick so many teenagers to hang out with? That's creepy.
There's so much creepy. Like seriously, the entire like the whole Edward and finding Bella as his like soulmate is so creepy. Like she's so young. It's so creepy. Yeah, the whole thing. And it was so cringy. There's so much that was so embarrassing. I just had a hard time. Eden, what were your thoughts?
Oh, I was just about to say that Edward was Carlisle's first transformation, right? Like that was the first person he transformed. And he did it because he wanted a companion, which that was like a weird thing to point out. I was like, hold on.
Pick an adult.
Pick an adult. Who, just like...
Because people were dying. It's not like he was the only one dying. Yeah. There was a room full of people.
Yeah.
It's really weird. I just saw the original Nosferatu, like the old 1920s silent film. I saw it on Halloween. Great. We love German expressionism. It was really interesting because, like, the myth, the whole Dracula myth and all of the vampire stuff, like the undertones of rape are such a big part of what a vampire is and how a vampire functions, that I don't think you can be a vampire and be respectful of consent. And so that's what's interesting to me is why, like, Stephenie Meyer is living her life. And I don't want this just to be a critique on Stephenie Meyer, but it kind of is. But like why vampires and why making them like attractive for these like virginal teenage girls that she's writing this to? Like that's what I'm interested in is like who did she want her audience to be? And she kind of fought against like the whole rapey vampire thing, but those undertones are still there. But those undertones didn't feel like they were because of vampire lore. It felt like it was the early 2000s, what we pictured romance and dating and how unhealthy relationships were depicted in TV as being healthy. Like you want someone that wants you so badly that they're going to die because they can't be with you. You want someone who you are an object to them, that they're going to want to like follow you and stalk you and protect you. And that's what love is supposed to look like. And it's like just really unhealthy. The whole thing is really unhealthy. And I am just so curious because the books get worse as they go on of unhealthy, like way worse. I'm just really intrigued. Like there's a part at the end, even like with the age things. Why did she have to have, like in the last book, this isn't even the book we read, why did she have to have Jacob imprint on a baby? Like there's so many weird age things that Stephanie was playing with that we were all like, it's fine because it's fantasy.
Yeah, that one
We
is.
talk about the monster aspect of this book because, again, like monsters are used in folktale to represent a part of humans, right?
Yeah.
And then you can like look at this like heightened version of the worst part of humanity and compare it and learn from it. So like zombies are apathy and like giving up your ability to think for yourself, and werewolves are like overindulgence or alcoholism or like, you know, like that change in who you are because you've given yourself to a substance usually. And then vampires are like nighttime because it's the things we hide about ourselves. It's the worst part of us. It's being greedy. It's being controlling. But then there's always something about the monster that is a weakness. So like for vampires, it's garlics, cross, and the sun. And she took all of that out. And so she was like, we're going to take the worst part of who we are, the things we like to hide in the shadows. We're going to make them good. And we're going to take away the downside of it.
I don't think that was a conscious choice, though. I don't think she was thinking about it. Not to say that was like. I'm not like defending that. I'm mostly just saying like it was just more of like a look shiny.
Yeah, I think you're right.
You can't be in love in high school if you can't go to high school.
What was that?
You can't be in love at high school if you can't go to high school.
Yeah. That's true. You can't fall in love with a 15-year-old if you're not in high school.
And you can't go to high school if you can't go out in the daytime.
Yeah. And also, shiny just makes them more appealing. It's like she just kept trying to find ways to make Edward more and more attractive.
She's like, what if his skin diamonds? I know what girls like. Girls like diamonds.
What was also interesting, I remember when the movies came out because there is a big like Native American focus in certain parts of the book but then it kind of leans into a like
a noble savage
kind of offensive where what, Randi?
The noble savage stereotype.
That for sure. And also it gets offensive because in the next books we find out that the Native Americans are actually werewolves. So it becomes a race thing, whereas the vampires could be anybody. But I do remember like a lot of people were like, this is the first time Hollywood has really like allowed Native American characters to be like fully fledged humans, like ironically, even though they're werewolves. Like Jacob has like a personality that's outside of like all the major stereotypes, yada yada yada. And people were really like applauding the idea that like they actually had Indigenous actors play the roles and stuff like that. But it's still. I don't even know where to touch on it. The whole thing is just so fascinating, and that it's such a big part of our youth and how our culture still looks at romance. Twilight is still such a and it's having a resurgence for sure. Like Urban Outfitters is selling clothes that have Twilight things, and like you go to markets and people are always doing, sometimes ironically, sometimes unironically, about Twilight. Like it's really interesting. I do feel like it's coming back in a way, and people are like making, video essays or like talking about how the movies are actually good, and they're trying to like argue that. It's like, like people have been like,
are you talking about my 1 hour video I just sent you?
What, you didn't?
You're talking about the 1 hour video essay I sent you?
No, there's other ones where they're like, no, the first movie is actually like postmodern art, like a postmodern art film. And it's hard. It's a stretch, but like that's coming back.
Is what it was.
Can we talk really quick about the books? that Bella reads and the fact that she goes to a library and is like, there are no books here I'm interested in reading. I've read all these books. Yeah. I'm going to sit and read this Jane Austen because I'm special and smart. Bitch, that was 2005. That Pride and Prejudice with Keira Knightley had just come out. Every teenage girl was obsessed with Jane Austen at that point. That did not make you special. Did that make you cool? Like, everybody was watching or reading those.
Also, the reason why she went to Seattle was to go to that bookstore, right? And do you know what she was going to buy? A recipe book about fish. That was her intention. So, like, when she had the whole thing about books, she was really going to Seattle. Like, she explicitly says she's going to go get a cookbook that focuses on fish. Which was just, I, like, really honed in on how much she was cooking different meats. Because it was, like, a weirdly big part of the book.
Very detailed about what meat she was cooking. You're right.
Weird.
So I was just thinking about the age thing again. If it's okay that we jump off the meat conversation.
Oh, it's okay. Absolutely. I guess. Ask Stephanie.
So, Eden, you mentioned earlier, like, it's okay because he's in high school. But, like, he hasn't always lived as a 17-year-old. Because he said the longer we stay someplace, the older we can get there. So he has, at points in his time as a vampire, been 24 or 25. And had he dated a 24 or 25-year-old, she would have had more ability to, like, consent to what was happening because her brain would have been fully developed.
Mm-hmm.
And in between reading that book and right now when we're talking about it, I read the whole Shadow and Bone series.
Whoa.
Which is also a girl who's not like other girls because she's worse. And an immortal being decides he wants to be romantically interested in.
Right, of course.
A girl who has humans who are interested romantically in her. That other people are like, why? She's scrawny and dumb.
Right.
But it also has all these female characters that are fully developed and are very interesting and are villains or good guys or a mix of those who have interesting internal monologues and interesting motivations and are loyal and betray people, like, are just very like, very interesting characters. And you like them because of those things. Like, you like the female characters in that series because you're like, yeah, she is clumsy, but, like, she's trying to be better and she doesn't use that as a crutch. Or she's clumsy because she's not engaging in things that make her special. And when she starts engaging in those things, she's, like, an all-around better person. And she, like, finds who she is. And she's a full-fledged adult. So when the 1,000-year-old immortal is like, I want to bang you, you're like, this is weird, but, like, she's making a consent decision.
Yeah.
When the immortal being is like, what's up, Bella? You're like, that 17-year-old does not know how to make a consent decision.
Yeah.
They're just, I found that there's, like, a lot of parallels I felt between those two characters. And I was like, one of them you love because of those things, and one of them I really despise because of these similar things. Because it's not flesh.
I also talk about making a character clumsy does not make them relatable. Like, making Bella fall down all the time did not make me be like, yeah, no, that's my girl. Like, she's got a neurological condition if she's falling as often as she falls in this book.
Mm-hmm.
No control over her limbs.
Drives me crazy. I also get so frustrated with the way they describe her body in the beginning. Because I was like, one, this is a teenage girl's monologue about her own body. She would not talk about herself that way. That's the way an adult woman thinks a teenage girl would talk about herself. It's nuts. And the way they describe her is like...
I remember it, Randi. Can you tell us kind of what you remember?
She's talking about the girls in Arizona and how they're fit and trim and tan and how she's not big, but she has meat on her and she's curvy. Like, I don't know. Just the way she described her own body, I was like, yuck. I remember being a teenage girl. I remember the way I thought about my body, and it was never in the way that they describe her body in this. I also don't like that she has very little emotional range. She doesn't feel big emotions. And I, again, remember being a teenage girl and just laying on the kitchen floor crying about having no friends. And my mom being like, we do this every semester. You're going to make friends in your classes. You're going to be okay. Or just, you know, like being a teenage girl is just a mix of like sorrow and rage all the time.
So much.
And Bella doesn't feel that at all. She doesn't feel anything until she meets Edward, and then all she feels is horny. And I'm like, she's going through all of these big changes. Yeah, it's like her mom got married and then chose to follow her. Well, chose to go to Florida with this new husband instead of being like, no, Bella, I'm going to stay here and be your mom. She moves to a place she doesn't know anyone. That's like a rich area for her to like really dive into what it feels to be alone, or what it feels to be a girl in a new place and just trying to fit in. And instead it was just like, Bella's sarcastic. She fell down. She likes to read fancy books. She has zero emotional depth. And I'm like, what a waste to like really describe what it felt like to be 16 and alone and sad, and to overcome that because, let's be honest, you're just 5 days from your period and you don't have enough experience to be like, eat a piece of cake and go to bed. You know, like,
yeah.
I don't know. I feel like she just missed that opportunity to make Bella more than just a cookie cutter character.
Yeah. Well, you brought up the point also, the loneliness, because like that would have been such a great opportunity also for her and Edward to bond, because I would have loved to know what it's like to be I would have loved to know what it's like to be a vampire who's pretty lonely.
Lucky you, there's Midnight Sun, which is from the perspective of Edward.
That sounds awful.
But like, you know, like that would have been a really great like meeting point for them, is like these two people that don't feel understood or don't feel like they get it. Like he has to move all the time and he only has his like family and they're exhausted and they've been together for over 100 years. Like, you know, I just think, yeah, there could have been a connection outside of just like physical lust, which is all it was, because Edward just wants to eat her. And
she
also,
wants to bang.
Yeah. And so like, it was literally just physical. There was no intellectual or emotional connection.
All they do is fight and try and kiss.
Okay, but I paid special attention to this because I was like, I want to know like what really builds up to their love story. And so I was paying attention to how much they actually spoke. And based on like the internal timing of the novel, they had communicated for less than an hour by the time she was like, I am in love with you. Because he drives her home, and that's like 25 to 35 minutes. They sit next to each other in class, but they don't really talk except for the one lab, which don't get me started on her being like, I did this lab in Arizona 3 weeks ago. I know what all of these are. No, you don't. You would have forgotten by then.
100%.
And then they're in love. Like it goes from never speaking, one car ride, in love.
That feels
I
really
guess that's also a consent conversation too, because like don't like vampires naturally attract kind of their prey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true. It feels realistic for a teenage girl. Oh, sorry, Eden. But it feels realistic for a teenage girl to like fall in love that way. But it doesn't feel realistic, you know, like to fall in love in quotes. Because, you know, like I think like a boy would smile at me and I was like, okay, I guess we're getting married. And then we'd never talk and I don't know how to deal with it, you know? But like for just conceptualizing Edward as 117 or whatever, and like having lived a long life, very wise, read everything, loves Debussy or something, like I don't think he would have fallen. Like there's a disconnect there. Sorry, Eden, go ahead.
Yeah, two things minus the age thing. I think it is very accurate of how like teenagers fall in love, and like the awkwardness where like you really don't have to say much. You just have to like if you guys have seen Pen 15, like just looking at their ear will be like so titillating. It's like, wow, like this boy is the cutest boy I've ever seen. And he might be like a total douchebag or whatever, but you don't care because all you know is you're attracted to this boy. And I want to be clear that my apologist point of view isn't in defense of all of these like very, very accurate and very, very valid points that you're all bringing up. I think we are just putting a lot of shoulda, woulda, coulda into a story that was so obviously a first draft. And what a fun first draft it is. You know what I mean? It's
yeah.
And like giving too much credit to a woman who's just like, I want to write a fun love story. And it was fun in that sense, you know, like, so that's where my apologist nature comes from. Cause it's like, yeah, it was her first draft. It was a pretty good first draft. It hit plot point. And that's all this book is. It's just plot, no character development.
Yeah.
And like if that's what I needed on a January evening, you know, after being a little full from Boston Market's creamed spinach.
Being just dominated on that keyboard.
Yeah.
The whole community
Played a little Debussy and then, you know, read about a boy who loved Debussy.
Okay, speaking about his music, though, something that infuriated me is that he owned so many CDs. Because I feel like a person who's been alive for 100 years would be like, technology changes. I'm not going to re-buy all of my music. Technology changes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, because I still listen to CDs in my car.
Yeah, but I feel like she would have walked into that room and there would have been like records and then CDs, and he would have been like, here are the 6 8-tracks I purchased.
Yeah.
Like, he would not like, maybe it's just because I'm very cheap, but I would not repurchase 100 albums every time technology changed.
Oh yeah, and he's so douchey that you know he'd be like, it sounds better on the album.
100%.
It feels more alive.
Yeah, he would have like a really intense vinyl situation and like sound system and like, yeah.
And they'd be driving vintage cars for sure.
Yeah. Well, they love that need. They have that need for speed. Do you remember that part?
And the Volvos.
I was like, if you live forever, you don't need to get anywhere quick.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating. Can we talk about the impact? Because I think the legacy of the book is what's really interesting, especially in consideration of what Eden said. Like, we know 50 Shades of Grey was written as a fan fiction of Twilight.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
actually,
sure
I would allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah.
I would actually read Twilight as a fan fiction of Jane Eyre.
Well, that's
I also was
true.
thinking of Jane Eyre.
Yeah, Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights were really big inspirations. I mean, I think in one of the books, she has a Wuthering Heights quote at the beginning or at the end, and there's a lot of Jane Eyre references. Like, there's a lot of Bronte sisters for Stephanie, clearly. And then
Not a
50
healthy choice
Shades
for
of
anyone.
No. And then 50 Shades of Grey is after that. And then I'm sure if we could do like a family tree of all of these, there's a trillion other like smut things about these like really unhealthy relationships. And it's interesting that
log on to fanfiction.net.
This book and the smut was better.
Which book?
Sorry, what was that?
Like,
You dropped out. Could you say that whole thing over again?
I had read some sort of smutty books right before I read this book, and like they were in healthier relationships.
Were they written in the last like 10 years?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I do. I really think that this is like a time capsule of early 2000s, like so much, because yeah, like I really think we thought those relationships were normal. Like even when the TV show Gossip Girl came out, which came out like a couple years after, those were those types of relationships too, which were just like obsessive and lusty and weird, and yeah, like the obsession factor is really creepy.
Can we talk about this Jane Eyre connection to Twilight? Because Jane Eyre is my favorite book. And so when I was reading this, I was like, this is giving some bad rip-off Jane Eyre vibes. And I think the reason I love Jane Eyre and I really struggled with Twilight, even though some of the major plot points kind of follow, is that Rochester is viewed as a villain. To me, reading it, I'm like, in the beginning, Rochester is a villain until he realizes that he is making bad choices and bad things happen to him, and his bad characteristics, his flaws lead to consequences. And then she leaves, like she takes herself out of that situation. She acknowledges their negative and like bad pattern, takes herself out, and then like goes over here and like develops on her own, and he's over here developing on his own. And so when they come back together, they're two different people who are in better places to have a relationship and are on much equaler footing because she's gotten inheritance, and so she is financially independent. He has been physically damaged, which has its own whole other thing, but like they're on a much better equal footing by the time that they are in love and can be together. Whereas Bella and Edward, unless he does something he really doesn't want to do and kills her and makes her a vampire or whatever, they're never going to be on equal footing. And he's okay with that, which is the thing that like bothers me a little bit. And again, there are no consequences for any laws in this book. Also, Northwest Washington, particularly by the ocean in the summertime, is beautiful and it's blue skies. And for her to constantly be like, it's so cloudy and I hate Washington because it's too cloudy. Nuts. She spent the summer there. She'd be like, wild. Beautiful. I love it.
She had only ever lived there in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, her active disdain of a beautiful place with an ocean is insane to me.
A warm, beautiful place in the summertime. I also want to talk a little bit about Jacob in this book.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like if we read the story from Jacob's point of view, Bella would be a villain. Because I feel like the only time she really engages with him is like flirting with him to trick him into getting information. And he's like, I don't know why he likes me so much. I'm like, because you've only ever been overly nice and flirty with him. And he's 15. Like, of course that boy thinks you love him. You've only ever shown him indications that you love him.
Uh-huh.
Eden, what are your thoughts about Jacob?
On Jacob? Well, so I'm trying not to confuse it with the other books, but I think very true what you were saying, like Bella is the villain in his life story, and then it's hard not to forget that he imprints on a baby in the fourth book. So it's just kind of like, that kind of taints my view of him in the first book. But yeah, poor boy, just getting kind of strung along.
Yeah, he's like not really in it very much. I was expecting him to be a major part because there's always like Team Jacob, Team Edward, but he's like at the beach with them. They stop by the house one or two times. He shows up at prom. It's just like this poor boy who is like, oh, this girl's into me because she acts like she's into him. And then he goes to hang out with her again and she's super cold. And then, I don't know, I just didn't like that.
Yeah, he's more of a character in book 2.
I will say, I feel like the imprinting on a baby part is just another example of the lazy writing.
Yeah.
Like, we need Jacob someone. Here, have the baby.
Yeah, totally.
Also, the last point I have for what I didn't like was their love is gross.
Yeah. It felt like, it just feels like she's, and I don't know if Stephanie intended this. I don't know. But it feels like Bella's doing exactly what her mom did. Like, it feels like Bella's losing herself to a man and she's just doing exactly what her mom did. But for some reason, Bella's like, however old she is, and she's like, I've got to save everybody. I'm the only one that can save everyone. Which is also wild at the end, to the point where she's like, I'm going to die for everyone I love. That was so melodramatic. It was so hard for me. And it's also like, you clearly, like, you're in an abusive relationship, Bella. You have no sense of self. No sense of self. And it just gets worse and worse and worse as the books go on.
I'd also like to point out there's very little plot to this book.
Yeah.
Like, we were talking about how there's no character development. It's all plot driven. But if you really think about what happens in it, she moves to Fort. They do some biology. They play baseball. The only part of the book that I was at all engaged with is the playing of baseball.
Yeah, which is also a weird thing, that baseball, the whole thing, it's like, it's fun. It's very Americana. Yeah.
All of the plot happens in the last, like, 4 chapters.
Yeah, 100%. But I think as a teenage girl, I love that. Because I could just read it to be a little bit like, ooh, flirty.
Laid in a meadow in the sun.
Exactly. Like, I want to lay in a meadow with a boy. But in all reality, that seems like the worst experience.
So unsafe. Even if he's not a vampire, like, looking to kill you, like, so unsafe.
Who's only talking to you because he loves the smell of your blood.
Yeah.
Because he wants to eat you.
Because he just
I was thinking, like, trying to think of a good analogy. It's like, what is a good steak that I would just make out with? Like,
and then yell at.
Oh my gosh. I've been
I
watching.
just have a personal policy where I do not take myself to anywhere a man could kill me and then hide the body. Like, he's going to have to carry the body out there. And she willingly took herself to a place where a man could kill and hide her body.
Yeah, and she lied to her dad about it.
Like, if you're going to bury me, you're going to drag the body through the woods. I'm not walking it out there.
Yeah.
Really quick, as we come to a close on this discussion, one thing that I thought was funny was reading on Stephanie Meyer's inspiration for the series. The list is massive.
Oh my gosh, tell us.
So Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice.
Sure.
New Moon is based on Romeo and Juliet. Eclipse is on... Oh, she said Twilight is on Pride and Prejudice. Eclipse is Wuthering Heights. Breaking Dawn is Midsummer's Night Dream.
Wow, that's an interesting one to reference. Midsummer
It is a... Yeah.
It's like...
I don't know
also that...
donkey.
Yeah. I don't remember that book. Anyway, she said that the Cullens were inspired by Meyer's own family as well as characters from X-Men, the animated series. Other influences on the series, which Meyer has acknowledged, include the 1847 novel Jane Eyre, HGTV, and the films Iron Man, Somewhere in Time, Stranger Than Fiction, and Baby Mama.
Baby Mama.
I will give you the Baby Mama is a great movie.
I love
so was that first Iron Man.
Yeah. But I'm so confused about the HGTV. Like
maybe the describing the Collins house is probably from HGTV.
Is that what it is from?
I would imagine.
Because I'm like, there are so many shows on there. Are you talking about like the House Hunters? Are you talking about? Yeah.
I don't understand.
Extreme Makeover. Yeah.
I love that that's an inspiration. I think maybe that was all the cooking of the meats. Maybe she was watching different like cooking shows and she's like, Ina Garten. She's got that figured out.
I had a roommate in college who said sometimes you want to eat a symphony bar. And Twilight is an excellent symphony bar.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%.
Talking to a friend that loved it in college, probably that same roommate. And she was like, you got to remember that when you read this, you need to be 20-year-old and hate yourself. And then you can really like Twilight. And I was like, okay.
Yeah. I think if we just let it be what it was made to be, which is just fun reading, Eden reading it in Borders bookstore for a whole day, really creasing that binding. So no one else will
I don't know how I got away with it. Like, I feel like, I don't know.
That was their whole thing. It's why they went out of business.
I feel like Borders was great, though. Yeah, I feel like I spent hours
I had, like,
there.
chairs everywhere. Like, I remember just, like, plopping down in a chair and just reading. Yeah.
Providing a free space to read books that you want people to buy is not a great business model.
Yeah.
Also Amazon, but we don't have time to get into that.
Yeah. Should this book be banned?
Oh, I was going to say, why was it banned?
That's what we have to
for
figure
the
out.
reasons. Yeah. What are your guesses?
I think it's sexually...
I think it should not be banned. I think it should be required reading for every teen. And then there should be an assembly where we talk about what abuse looks like. And people have to point out what they noticed in the book.
Oh, I love that. I love trying to get that plan across to the school board. But I agree, honestly, because I do think it's it's like literally points out all the red flags of abuse. I know it's all leading up to something, like it's not getting better. And I think that's important. Yeah.
So I wasn't sure if it was banned because that was an era when they're like, ban Harry Potter, there's witches, ban Twilight, there's vampires. Or if it was banned because they were like, this has deep psychological effect on girls, or if it was banned because a woman wrote it for girls. And people who make those sort of decisions hate it when women write things for women.
That's happening now where people are banning books because women are writing them for a woman's perspective. My theory is that it's just because it has vampires in it. Like, literally, I think that's the only reason why it's banned. Because it's not sexually explicit enough.
All right. You ready for the real reasons?
It's more sexually explicit.
Say that again,
sexually explicit?
Oh, I said it would have been better had it been more sexually explicit.
Okay, so it was on the American Library Association top 10 list of the most frequently challenged books of 2010 for containing a religious viewpoint and violence. It was on the same list in 2009 for being sexually explicit, unsuited to age group, and having a religious viewpoint.
That's tough, because if it was for another age group, then that would not go well, because as an adult, I had a hard time reading it.
Yeah.
No point do missionaries knock on anybody's door to share the good news of the gospel. It's a very subtle religious message.
Very subtle. And I think it might be because she is, a Mormon woman. And I think once you are vocal about your religious beliefs, I think people just well, she also cites Mormonism as a big influence in the book too. So I think that's what people are taking as well, and just like reading really into it and finding Mormon.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I don't see any Mormon allusions in the book, to be honest. But maybe that's just me.
I wish there was more violence, to be honest. Like, I wish there was more sexy time in it. We don't even get to see them rip that guy apart because she's so drugged out of her mind at that point. Like, if we're going to to kill a vampire, you have to rip them into 1,000 pieces and burn them. Like, show me the blood, bros. But no, we just got her, like, stoned out of her mind on the floor.
Oh, that happens in later books. Don't you worry. They get really explicit to the point where it's like, this is kind of Whiplash, where it gets weirdly sexual and weirdly violent. And then you're like, why is this 12-year-old in the theater watching this right now? This is...
Not to like harp on bone, but there's a part where they tear somebody into pieces and people like throw up. And I'm like, yeah, let's show some violence and then show an actual human response to it.
Yeah.
To close out this episode, I brought up the types of abuse page on the National Domestic Violence Hotline website, which is a resource. They have a phone number and a chat line and a text number. Wait, I wish it would tell me what it is. Oh, here it is. 1-800-799-SAFE. And SAFE is 7233. The types of abuse include physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse, digital abuse, sexual coercion, reproductive coercion, stalking, and spiritual abuse. Those are the different types of behaviors, types of abuse, and those categories have different types of behaviors that abusers use to gain or maintain power and control over a partner. So I highly recommend that as a resource. And Renae had not a bad idea of like making it required reading and then talking about it.
Yeah.
Or listen to this podcast episode.
I think, and just like to reiterate, like the 4 pillars of abuse include entitlement and objectification, both things that Edward does and feels. Control, manipulation, lies, and secrecy. Compulsive behaviors. Go ahead.
He keeps so many secrets from her. And he, like, the scene where he just, like, puts her in a car and is like, I'm driving you away now.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much control stuff. Compulsive behaviors, lack of consent, that's included in that. And then lack of accountability. He doesn't have any remorse for, like, the fact that he won't give her any agency in her decisions and in giving her full yeah, all that kind of stuff. And there's a big emphasis on gender roles in there. And he tries to alienate her from her family and friends. And yeah, there's a lot there. But I love that resource, Eden. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Randi, and belatedly Renae.
Belatedly.
Thank you both for being on our podcast, and we're so excited that we were able to talk. Well, we were able to get you to read Twilight and then get you to on our show to talk about it. So thank you so much.
Seriously, you gave so much. It was so fun to hear your thoughts. Honestly, I knew it. I knew it would be great. So thank you.
Unless you want to plug any
Vampire Diaries.
Yeah. I'm ready. I'm ready. And True Blood.
Uh-huh. We have 3 different shows. I've only watched 1, so.
And What We Do in the Shadows.
That one is a fun one.
Quality vampire content out there.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay.
Burn This Book is produced by us, Nicola Corin and Eden Wen.
Music by myself, Nicole, and performed by my dad, Frank.